The story of the fall of the Moors is not a simple tale of armies clashing on dusty plains or of fortresses crumbling beneath the weight of Christian catapults. It is a story far more intricate, woven from the brilliant achievements of a civilization that once illuminated Europe and the gradual unraveling of that same civilization under the forces of war, betrayal, ambition, and painful internal division. To understand how Al-Andalus, once the jewel of the medieval world, a place of scholars, poets, engineers, philosophers, and rulers, could fade into the mists of history, we must travel back through 4 centuries of triumphs and tragedies to trace the steps that led to its final collapse. It begins in the twilight of an empire. By the 10th century, Al-Andalus had reached a level of sophistication unmatched anywhere in Europe. Cities like Córdoba, Seville, Granada, and Toledo dazzled with public libraries, paved roads, street lamps, aqueducts, and vast marketplaces filled with silk, spices, and manuscripts. Diplomats from Christian kingdoms traveled south not merely to negotiate peace, but to marvel at what they called the ornament of the world. And yet, beneath the glittering surface of its golden age, cracks had already begun to form. Political rivalries simmered, ambitious governors plotted their independence, and after the death of the powerful Caliph Al-Hakam II, a succession crisis would ignite the first great fracture in Andalusian unity. When the Umayyad Caliphate of Córdoba collapsed around the year 1031, Al-Andalus did not simply lose a ruler, it lost its anchor. The great administrative machine that once coordinated armies, collected taxes, mediated tribal tensions, and enforced unity suddenly dissolved. In its place rose dozens of small, quarreling principalities known as the Taifa kingdoms. Each Taifa was ruled by an ambitious warlord, a poet king, or a military commander seeking prestige, legitimacy, and survival. For a moment, these taifas produced a dazzling burst of culture: opulent courts, flourishing poetry, ornate palaces. But politically, they were fractured, vulnerable, and fatally dependent on their Christian rivals to the north. This fragmentation did not go unnoticed. The Christian kingdoms, Castile, Leon, Aragon, and Navarre, had spent centuries on the defensive. But now the power dynamic had shifted. The frontier that once separated Christian and Muslim lands became porous. Christian knights rode south not only to raid, but to extract payments, demanding pariahs, heavy tributes so enormous that Taifa rulers emptied their treasuries to buy peace. These payments funded the Christian war machine. Gold from Al-Andalus poured into the coffers of Castile, building armies that would one day march against the very cities that had paid to avoid destruction. And yet, it was not military might alone that eroded Moorish power. It was division. Rival taifas competed for prestige by hiring Christian mercenaries to attack their Muslim neighbors. The most infamous example came when the Taifa of Zaragoza employed a knight who would later become a legend: Rodrigo Díaz de Vivar, known to history as El Cid. A Christian champion fighting for Muslim gold, battling other Muslims at the command of a Muslim ruler. Nothing illustrated the fractured politics of Al-Andalus more vividly. As the Taifas warred among themselves, they unintentionally strengthened the kingdoms determined to conquer them. And the Christians seized every opportunity. In 1085, Alfonso VI of Castile took Toledo, the heart of medieval Iberia, the intellectual center of the Western Islamic world. The shock of its loss rippled across Al-Andalus like an earthquake. Toledo was more than a city, it was a symbol. Its fall revealed the consequences of division, and the Taifas, realizing the gravity of their situation, looked southward for salvation. Their call for help reached the deserts of North Africa, where a powerful Berber empire was rising, under the banner of strict religious reform. The Almoravids. The Taifas expected temporary assistance, a mercenary army to repel their Christian enemies. But what crossed the Strait of Gibraltar was not a band of warriors. It was a disciplined, fervent, empire-building force, determined to unite Al-Andalus under a new order. In 1086, the Almoravids crushed Alfonso VI at the Battle of Sagrajas, a victory so decisive that it briefly halted the Christian advance. Yet this salvation came at a cost. The Almoravid leaders were appalled by what they saw in the Taifas: luxury, political intrigue, and what they considered moral decay. One by one, they absorbed the Taifas into their growing empire. Al-Andalus was once again united, but under foreign rule that many Andalusians resented. For a time, stability returned. Cities flourished, trade revived, and Christian expansion slowed. But the Almoravids soon faced their own rivals. From deep within the Atlas Mountains, another reformist movement rose. The Almohads, more militant, more uncompromising, and determined to overthrow their predecessors. By the mid-12th century, the Almohads swept across Morocco and then into Al-Andalus, replacing Almoravid governance with their own. This oscillation between African empires, first Almoravids, then Almohads, bought Al-Andalus time, but at a cost. The constant turnover of power weakened local leadership and deepened resentments. Each new regime imposed stricter religious reforms, seeking to centralize authority, but alienating segments of the Andalusian population, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish alike. Scholars who once thrived under tolerant courts fled to North Africa or the Christian North. Internal revolts simmered, and while the Moors battled among themselves, the Christian kingdoms continued to grow stronger, more unified, and more determined. The Almohads reached their zenith under the great Caliph Yaqub al-Mansur, whose victory at Alarcos in 1195 temporarily checked the Christian advance. But just 17 years later, in 1212, the tides would turn irrevocably. At the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, a coalition of Christian armies delivered a crushing defeat to the Almohads. It was not merely a military loss. It was the moment the balance of power in Iberia shifted permanently in favor of the Christian kingdoms. After Las Navas, the Moors were no longer fighting to maintain dominance. They were fighting to survive. In the decades that followed, city after city fell. Córdoba in 1236, Valencia in 1238, Seville in 1248. Each conquest carved away pieces of a once majestic civilization. Refugees streamed southward. Entire families, scholars, craftsmen, architects, poets, and soldiers retreated to the last surviving enclave, the Emirate of Granada. Protected by the Sierra Nevada mountains and fortified by brilliant diplomatic maneuvering, Granada would endure for more than 2 centuries after the fall of Seville. The final war for Granada did not begin with roaring cannons or a dramatic clash of armies. It began quietly, almost deceptively, with political maneuvering, broken alliances, and the slow tightening of a noose. By 1482, Ferdinand and Isabella understood something that the leaders of Granada had failed to grasp. Wars are not won solely on the battlefield. They are won through control. Control of trade routes, of diplomacy, of morale, and most importantly, of time. The Catholic monarchs had time on their side. Granada, splintered and increasingly dependent on tribute payments, did not. And so the war opened like a masterful chess match. While Moorish forces sparred with Castilian armies along river valleys and mountain passes, Ferdinand and Isabella targeted the kingdom's lifelines. Their armies marched through the fertile plains surrounding Granada, cutting off food supplies. Their diplomats forged alliances with neighboring Christian states, ensuring that no external power would intervene on Granada's behalf. And their messengers rode through Europe, proclaiming the war as a holy crusade, drawing volunteers and legitimacy from the religious fervor of the late Middle Ages. Inside Granada's walls, crisis brewed. The Nasrid dynasty was at war with itself. The reigning emir, Abul Hassan, faced rebellion from his own son, Muhammad XII, known to history as Boabdil. Instead of uniting against the looming Christian threat, Granada fractured along familial and tribal lines. Some factions supported Abul Hassan's brother, Muhammad al-Zaghal, a seasoned warrior respected for his courage. Others supported Boabdil, who sought Christian assistance to claim the throne. These divisions were catastrophic. While the Moors fought one another, Ferdinand and Isabella advanced steadily, city by city, fort by fort. The first major blow came with the fall of Alhambra, a fortress town captured by Castilian forces early in the campaign. The shock of its loss reverberated throughout Granada. "Woe is me, Alhambra," became a haunting refrain in Andalusian poetry, a lament that captured the helplessness of a people watching their homeland slip away. Yet instead of rallying behind a single leader, factions within Granada deepened their rivalries. Every moment they spent fighting each other was a moment lost, a moment the Christians used to tighten their grip. As the war intensified, Ferdinand and Isabella deployed a weapon that would redefine medieval warfare: gunpowder artillery. Moorish fortresses, once considered impregnable, now faltered under the thunderous blasts of cannons. Stone walls that had endured for centuries crumbled in days. Cities like Loja, Ilora, and Mochlin fell not because of inadequate Moorish courage, but because technology had shifted the balance of power. Moorish armor, tactics, and fortifications belonged to an earlier era. The Christians had evolved into a gunpowder empire. But even as the military situation worsened, the true collapse of Granada came from within. Boabdil, at one point captured by the Christians, struck a secret deal with Ferdinand. In exchange for his release, he agreed to pay tribute and refrain from aiding his father or uncle. This meant that while Abul Hassan and al-Zaghal resisted the Christian advance, Boabdil withheld troops, hoping the Christians would eliminate his rivals so he could inherit an intact but reduced kingdom. It was a gamble rooted in ambition, and it played directly into Ferdinand's hands. A divided enemy is the easiest to conquer. Abul Hassan, struggling to maintain control, was eventually forced aside by his own people. Al-Zaghal took command and mounted fierce resistance, winning several key battles against Christian forces. For a moment, hope flickered. But hope can be a fragile thing. Al-Zaghal's victories, though impressive, did little to change the strategic reality. Granada was surrounded, its cities isolated, its supplies dwindling. And while Al-Zaghal fought with admirable determination, Boabdil continued negotiating with the Christians, undermining any chance of a unified defense. By 1487, the Christian armies captured Malaga, one of the most vital ports in the emirate. Its fall severed Granada's access to the sea, ending any possibility of trade, reinforcements, or escape. It was a devastating loss. Ferdinand and Isabella punished Malaga harshly. Many of its inhabitants were sold into slavery. The message was unmistakable. Resistance would be met with total ruin. The psychological impact of Malaga's fall was immense. Many within Granada began to question whether continued resistance was worth the suffering. But al-Zaghal refused to surrender. Retreating to the mountainous region of Almeria, he continued the fight, rallying supporters and engaging the Christians in a series of guerrilla campaigns. His resilience was admirable, but ultimately futile. In 1489, after a long siege, Almeria fell. Al-Zaghal, exhausted and abandoned, fled to North Africa. With his rivals defeated and no internal challengers left, Boabdil became the sole ruler of Granada. Yet it was an empty throne. His kingdom was surrounded, his people demoralized, and the Christian armies, now hardened by years of war, stood poised to strike at the heart of Moorish Spain. By 1490, the siege of Granada was inevitable. The city, magnificent, ancient, crowned by the glowing red towers of the Alhambra, became the final stage in an 800-year-long story. Granada was more than a city. It was a symbol of everything Al-Andalus had ever accomplished. Its gardens, designed with mathematical precision, channeled water from the mountains into fountains that seemed to defy gravity. Its palaces were masterpieces of geometry and light. Its scholars preserved ancient knowledge and adapted it into new discoveries. Its poets wrote verses that still echo through history. To lose Granada was to lose the last sanctuary of Moorish civilization in Europe. Ferdinand and Isabella approached the siege with calculated patience. Instead of storming the city, they constructed a massive siege camp, an entire town, complete with markets, churches, and walls, right outside Granada's gates. They named it Santa Fe, Holy Faith. Its permanence sent an unmistakable message. The Christians were not leaving. Granada would either surrender or starve. Inside the city, famine spread. Crops failed, livestock dwindled, and grain supplies vanished. The people of Granada, once accustomed to bustling markets and fragrant gardens, now faced hunger and despair. Boabdil knew that continued resistance would lead to mass starvation. Yet surrender felt like betrayal, not only of his people, but of an entire civilization. Negotiations began in late 1491. Unlike the brutal sack of Malaga, the surrender of Granada would be governed by detailed terms that promised protection for the Muslim population, preservation of their customs, and tolerance of their religion. The Treaty of Granada guaranteed that mosques would remain open, that Muslim judges would preside over Muslim disputes, and that no one would be forced to convert. It was, on paper, a remarkably generous agreement, crafted to ensure a peaceful transition and prevent further bloodshed. On January 2, 1492, Boabdil rode out from the gates of Granada to meet Ferdinand and Isabella. As he handed over the keys to the city, the keys to the last Moorish kingdom in Europe, witnesses described him as calm, almost regal. But history remembers him for a single moment, one filled with tragedy, symbolism, and the weight of centuries. According to legend, as Boabdil rode away from Granada, he reached a high pass overlooking the valley, the place now called El Suspiro del Moro, the Moor's Sigh. There, he turned for one final look at the city he had lost. Overcome with grief, he began to weep. His mother is said to have told him, "You weep like a woman, for what you could not defend like a man." Whether these words were ever spoken remains uncertain, but the moment captures the sorrow of a fallen world. Granada, once a beacon of beauty and knowledge, had slipped from Moorish hands forever. Yet the ending of Al-Andalus was not as peaceful as the treaty had promised. Within a few years, the promises made to the Muslim population began to unravel. Forced conversions, destruction of mosques, and the persecution of those who clung to their faith became commonplace. The Moriscos, Muslims who had converted to Christianity under pressure, faced discrimination and suspicion. By 1609, they were expelled from Spain entirely, scattered across North Africa, leaving behind orchards, architecture, irrigation systems, and cultural legacies that would outlast them. Thus ended not only a kingdom, but a civilization. And yet, the fall of the Moors was never the story of a single battle, a single treaty, or a single man. It was the result of centuries of shifting alliances, internal rivalries, and the inability to unite against a relentless enemy. It was a story where brilliance met fragility, where cultural flowering coexisted with political fracture, and where a civilization's greatest weakness came not from those outside its walls, but from those within. The legacy of Al-Andalus, however, did not vanish. It lives on in Spain's architecture, language, music, science, and identity. It lives on in the irrigated fields of Andalusia, in the mathematical patterns of the Alhambra, in words like almohada, algebra, azúcar, and aceituna. It lives on in the scholars who preserved ancient Greek knowledge, in the medical texts that shaped European medicine, in the poetry that still echoes through the centuries. The fall of the Moors was the end of a kingdom, but not the end of their influence.